Welcome to the Paladin 1 to 80 Skills Guide. In this guide we'll cover all of your skills as you train to be completely inconspicuous as a job, better than the rest of them, but also hopefully kill your enemies along the way. Watch as you go from this to this. This guide is framed in the mindset of players completely new to Final Fantasy XIV, or the MMO genre in general. In that same vein, this will merely be an overview of the actions and how to use them. Optimal rotations are better left to their own in-depth videos just due to how much complexity is involved in perfect openers and overall rotations. We will, however, be crafting openers as we go to help new players understand what goes through creating openers and give them a foothold to push themselves into being able to do it on their own. The goal is to draw players in on the ground level so they can make strides to improve themselves. All tooltips will be shown at the level cap for each section. Level 50 for A Realm Reborn, level 60 for Heavensward, 70 for Stormblood, and then finally at level 80 for Shadowbringers. I also recommend all players add Sprint and Limit Break to their hotbars, both found in the General tab of your Actions menu. And as for how my hotbars build, it'll make sense at 80. Just put skills on your hotbars in a way you feel comfortable using as you're leveling. Everyone has their own way of doing things. With that all out of the way, let's begin. Before I get into the skills of Paladin, know this is not a tanking basics guide. This is focused on how to use your Paladin skills and not the general flow all tanks need to follow. Let's get into them. Tank Mastery just means you have tank stats. It's a passive trait. Level 1, Fast Blade. This is a basic 200 potency global cooldown attack. Spam it repeatedly until level 2, Fight or Flight. This is an off-global ability and can be used between globals or weaved between globals like Fast Blade. On a 60-second cooldown timer, it increases all physical damage you do by 25% for 25 seconds. The physical part of this will come into play much later. This is more powerful than any cooldown self-buff of any of the DPS jobs. The closest is Monk, having a 25% buff for 20 seconds. This gets across pretty well that even though you're a tank, you can put out some pretty heavy DPS. As such, make sure to use this anytime you can. It ends up giving you a lot of extra damage for about 11 globals. Level 4, Riot Blade. This does only 100 potency unless used in a combo after Fast Blade, where it will do 300 potency. Combos are denoted by a glowing border like the one shown here. From this point forward, I will not be mentioning the uncomboed potencies of future combo skills. Always use skills in their combos. As for using Riot Blade, just constantly alternate Fast Blade, Riot Blade, and keep going till your enemies are dead. Since Fight or Flight is 11 globals long, try and use it right before Riot Blade, since it's stronger. But either way is fine, as long as you are stringing your combos together and using Fight or Flight. Level 6, Total Eclipse. This is our AoE. It's a 5 yalm radius around you for 120 potency to every enemy hit. On 3 or more enemies, there is absolutely no reason to use anything but Total Eclipse. Even more enemies just means even more damage you can do. You can also use Fight or Flight to further multiply your damage. And again, 3 or more enemies is the go-to for pretty much all AoE in the game, with very few exceptions. At level 8, we have our first role action, Rampart. I will not be going in depth into these skills, but be sure to make room for these on your hotbars. They're all useful in their own specific ways. Check the description for a link to an in-depth role action video. I recommend it as I go into a large amount of detail, and all these skills have some major good uses. Level 10, Shield Bash. Trash. Level 10, Iron Will. Okay, that's not entirely fair. This is a global attack for a puny 110 potency. but this is the most powerful stun in the game with a base duration of 6 seconds, with diminishing returns of 3 seconds and 2 seconds before the enemy gains complete immunity to stun. But the downsides are huge. Again, only 110 potency. As a global attack, it will also break your combos, so if you use Fast Blade, then Shield Bash, you will have to use Fast Blade again before you can use Riot Blade. As an on-demand stun, it is very useful in some very specific circumstances, but extremely worthless in every other. If nothing else, you can use this to avoid dodging AoEs from normal enemies, until they stop having a stun vulnerability, and you have to dodge anyway. So basically, don't use this in 99% of cases. Also, every attack with shield in the name requires a shield equipped to use. Not that you should ever lack one, always wear a shield. Level 10, Iron Will. A 10-second recast that almost never comes into play. This is our enmity stance. Press the button, and the gem here will begin to glow. This means the stance is on, as well as the buff icon in your effects UI. Turn this on, and never turn it off outside of 8-man content in higher levels. You are the tank, and this stance multiplies your aggro generation for all of your actions by an extreme degree. There is absolutely no reason not to have this on before 8-man content. As for 8-man content, there will be 2 tanks, and in 24-man raids, 3 tanks. In situations where all tanks are fighting the same enemies, one tank will have on their tank stance, and the other tanks will have theirs off. This designates the 2 different states of tanks, main tank and off tank. The main tank is in charge of the boss at any given time, while off tanks focus on DPS, pick up the boss if the main tank dies, and will handle additional enemies. There are also sometimes attacks that will specifically target an off tank, or at least the person who is second on the aggro list. The main tank and off tank or tanks can swap multiple times in some fights. I only bring up these level 50 and beyond concepts now because of the part Iron Will plays. If both tanks keep their stances on, there could be fights for aggro and may cause other players to be killed as a result. So be sure to keep that in mind. When you're the only tank, never take this off. Once you get into content with multiple tanks, be sure to work as a team. Often, whoever turns their stance on first is volunteering to main tank. At level 12, we get the roll action low blow, which further trivializes Shield Bash. And at level 15, we get Provoke. Level 15, Shield Lob. Before I go over this skill, I must note that you did not automatically obtain it. That is because it is from your class quests. Anytime you do not automatically obtain a skill, go do your quests. You should be doing these anyway for some good gear. From this point on, I will only be noting on screen if a skill is a class or job quest skill. Shield Lob is a ranged attack with a pretty decent range. It does 100 potency on hit and has its own enmity multiplier. This is how you want to start most encounters. As you run up to the boss or enemies, you Shield Lob before you will reach it in order to get in some cheap damage and a small aggro lead. Typically, bosses start near the edges of boss arenas. Once we get to more traditional bosses, we'll tank them in the middle of the arena. This is the other big use for Shield Lob, causing the boss to move itself into position. Let's take our rock friend here for example. He starts at the edge, but when we Shield Lob, he moves closer to us. This makes for a good example of how we'll be using the skill on trash and boss fights going forward. Just be sure to only use it to pull. Mid-battle, this is almost always a bad choice of attack. Also be warned that there are exceptions to the rule. We will still Shield Lob the start, but then stick to the edge, like with our Burb friend here. At level 18, we get the roll action Interject, and at level 22, we get Reprisal. Level 26, Rage of Halone. Comboed off of Riot Blade, Rage of Halone does 350 potency to the enemy. We'll keep doing things all the same at this point, just going through our whole combo repeatedly rather than just Fast Blade and Riot Blade. We even keep Fight or Flight in the same position right before Riot Blade. This gets the most power out of it as we spam our 1-2-3 combo. At level 30, you will be able to undertake your first job quest in order to obtain a Soul Stone. You must also complete all class quests from your guild. The other requirement is the level 20 main story quest, Self-Management. This takes place soon after joining a grand company. This won't be an issue on normal servers, but any server with preferred status and the road to 70 buff will likely lead new players to be 30 long before this story threshold is met. Level 30, Spirits Within. On a short 30-second recast, this delivers a varying potency based on your HP. It does a minimum of 100 potency up to a maximum of 370 potency as you hit max health. We're basically going to just use this on cooldown, not worrying about our HP value when we go to use it. The only exception will be later on. We will want to hold a little bit if we just got hit by a tank buster, as these will drop you pretty low. It's a very slow scaling though, so as long as we're around 70% health or higher, don't worry about it too greatly. Arguably, as low as 50%, you shouldn't worry about it. Unless your healer is making mistakes, or you are making mistakes, it otherwise just never is something to worry about most of the time. And it is at this point we should craft our first opener. There isn't a lot to our DPS toolkit, but it's good to establish a baseline early. Keep in mind that openers are a single target affair, and once we get into AoE situations, we just relegate ourselves to spamming AoE until the herd thins out for both enmity and DPS reasons. Speaking of enmity, these openers are all valid whether or not we are in Iron Will. Shield Lob as we run to the boss, Fast Blade, Fight or Flight, Riot Blade, Spirits Within, Rage of Halone, Fast Blade, Riot Blade, Rage of Halone, and keep spamming 1-2-3 over and over. Yeah, not a lot in there, like I said. But let's go over the reasons why we have things ordered like this. We start with Shield Lob to get in some cheap damage during the run-up to the boss, and get it into position, as discussed. Then naturally, we start with our 1-2-3 combo with Fast Blade. We weave into Fight or Flight between GCDs here. We use it here specifically because, with high enough skill speed and low enough latency, the final GCD we will use under Fight or Flight will be Rage of Halone. This will maximize how much power we get out of Fight or Flight. The opener shown here ends the moment Fight or Flight does on this final Rage of Halone. And to quickly backtrack to the start, we pop Spirits Within after Riot Blade just to get it out while under the power of Fight or Flight, leaving us with no OGCDs left to spend and leaving us to spam our combo. Also, I want to note the lack of defensive cooldowns listed in this opener. Openers are offensive affair, and not every fight will call for the same cooldowns at the same time. Sometimes openers change to fit the fight too, but that's much rarer. In general, our openers will follow the same pattern no matter what. Our defensive cooldowns will be tailored to the fight. Keep this in mind as we move forward. At level 32, we get the roll action, Arm's Length. Level 35, Oath Mastery. To quickly get through this, our little tank gem has become a bar, and our enmity stance is denoted by this yellow shield pattern around it. Just by auto-attacking, this bar will increase by 5 every time you hit. Other than staying in range of enemies, there's not much you can do to affect your gauge gaining. What we will use it on is level 35, Sheltron. On a very, very short 5-second cooldown, but costing 50 gauge, all attacks are guaranteed to be blocked for 4 seconds. The amount of damage negated by a block is said next to the damage number. You naturally block all the time, just by nature of being a paladin, but this lets you control your blocks. In trash pulls, this isn't too great, but it's something. 4 seconds of reduced damage is still reduced damage. What this is more useful for is at the moment of a tank buster. A lot of bosses in the early levels have instant cast tank busters, so you can't prepare for it unless you are really good at memorizing timings. Luckily, the further we get, the more enemies, and trials especially, have tank busters with cast bars. As such, we can react to it and pop a Sheltron to reduce the damage guaranteed, just like any cooldown. Otherwise, there is no reason not to spend a free cooldown. If you have the gauge, use it. Level 38, Sentinel. A much less free cooldown, on a recast of 120 seconds, all damage is reduced by 30% for 15 seconds. Much more like Rampart, this is a traditional cooldown you want to use. Get yourself surrounded with a big group of enemies, and pop it off, especially in the moments where damage is heaviest. And obviously, the bigger the pull you do, the more you're negating with a cooldown. Just be sure to stay within your comfort zone. Level 40, Prominence. This is our combo for our AoE. Comboed off of Total Eclipse, it does 220 potency. This is a huge potency boost, so be sure to use the combo every time we use our AoE. Basically a power boost, but one you need to actively use, and should. Remember to fight or flight in AoE for even bigger damage. Level 45, Cover. This one is gonna be hard to justify. On a 120 second cooldown at the cost of 50 gauge, for 12 seconds you can put this on an ally of your choosing to take all the damage they take in their stead, as long as they remain within 10 yalms of you. Some attacks will just completely ignore cover, but those are mostly raid attacks. You can pop cooldowns and mitigate the damage you take like normal though. In general, this is really hard to use and is going to be really bad in most cases. If a player is making mistakes a lot, you can cover them and take the damage in their stead, having the HP buffer to compensate for their mistakes. But you can still die in their place because you took too much damage. A DPS taking 10,000 damage and your health is 10,000? Well, even cooldowns probably won't save you. But if they're taking lethal damage and this isn't lethal to you, you potentially help the party by saving their life. But honestly, unless it's the healer, don't try it. A dead DPS is a dead DPS, but a dead healer can quickly mean a dead party, depending on when they die and how hard the boss hits. The much more often useful situation is an 8-man content to cover your co-tank to take some damage for them. But even that doesn't ever happen. At level 48, we get our final roll action, Shirk. Level 50, Hallowed Ground. Paladin's ultimate cooldown is on a massive 420 second recast, but makes you completely immune to almost everything for 10 seconds. This makes Paladin just about the best tank for dungeons on its own merits. I don't think I need to explain why this is so good, besides just emphasizing complete immunity. Big groups of enemies, tank busters, some mechanics just being completely skipped or easily beaten. The lengthy cooldown explains itself. One major downside is you can't pair this with cover. Notice in this clip, I am taking both 0 damage and normal damage. The normal damage is coming from the cover, where the enemies attacking me do 0. This makes cover a lot weaker than it could be. And let me make one more point of emphasis clear. Use this skill, especially in dungeons. I understand the thought of holding it for emergencies, but the skill can prevent the emergency to begin with. 7 minutes is a huge cooldown, but you can still get 3 to 4 uses of Hallowed Ground depending on the dungeon and when you use it. Don't underestimate how much you can use the skill in a dungeon. Use it like it's an extremely powerful but normal cooldown. Level 50, Circle of Scorn. On a very short 25-second cooldown, Circle of Scorn does 120 potency to all enemies within 5 yalms of you, and applies a dot effect, dealing 35 potency for 15 seconds. Dots are on the server tick, doing damage every 3 seconds. So dividing the 15-second timer by 3, we get 5 ticks for a dot of 175 potency for a total of 295 potency. Use this on cooldown, especially if you're in an AoE situation. It's free damage, no matter the situation though, especially under fight or flight. Even if enemies are about to die, it's probably worth spending this cooldown, since the cooldown is so short. But with this, we have our entire A Realm Reborn toolkit, and only one new DPS skill for our rotation. There are only 2 changes in our opener, and that's the appearance of 2 uses of Circle of Scorn. One here at the start in a double weave with fight or flight, and one as fight or flight is about to end. I'm sure this seems very wasteful to use it before fight or flight, but this ends up being smoother for endgame rotations. For now, it's to build up muscle memory. We can only get in 1 use of Circle of Scorn within fight or flight anyway, so we just make it the later one. With our full level 50 toolkit, we're seeing the start of what makes Paladin the unbreakable shield of parties. Next up, Heavensward will give us some big changes. Level 54, Goring Blade. A global that combos off of Riot Blade, does 390 potency and a 21-second dot for 85 potency per tick for a dot of 595 potency, and in total, 985 potency. Yes, really, a 1000 potency attack if the full dot lasts. On 1 or 2 enemies, put this up for sure. 3 or more, it may be too hard to dot all 3, especially since you need to use an AoE or 2 to get enmity established. And for the next few levels, there's a bit of an oddity. Goring Blade is a higher base potency than Rage of Halone. As a result, you should never use Rage of Halone above 54. It's weird, but it makes sense at level 60. Leave Rage of Halone in the same spot as it is. We'll be coming back to it in a bit. Level 56, Divine Veil. On a 90-second cooldown, this is a defensive party buff you don't get to take part in. Upon using Divine Veil, you gain a buff for 30 seconds. While under the effect of this buff, the next healing spell you receive will expend the buff, releasing a shield to all allies within 15 yalms of you, lasting for 30 seconds, unrelated to the initial buff's timer. The shield is worth 10% of your maximum HP. Let me emphasize the your HP part, and then also emphasize the next healing spell part. All ability heals, no matter what, will not proc Divine Veil, as they are not spells. They are abilities. This difference actually matters. Regen is a spell, but it's also a regen, and has no direct heal. Even though it does heal you slowly, the spell itself has to heal in order to activate Divine Veil. But even AoE healing spells will proc it. Without proper fight knowledge, this can be a very hard skill to use effectively. Often, tank busters and raid-wide damage are separated by long stretches of time, or are in the wrong order. If your healer is really good, you may not even get heals because they shielded you so well a tank buster doesn't hurt. Or they put a bunch of regens on you and have no intent to heal you for quite a while. Or as established, OGCD healing abilities. White Mage especially has a ton of those. Between regen and their abilities, rarely does a White Mage use spells that can trigger Divine Veil. If you have a Scholar, it'll be fairly easy to get in the proc in general. You might not get it as quick as you like, but the Fairy's basic heal counts as a healing spell. So while you should make every attempt to use this skill, no matter which healer you get, you'll likely see the most success with Scholars and the least with White Mage. Astrologian, somewhere in the middle. At the worst, at least try to use this to block AoE damage. Level 58, Chivalry. This trait adds additional abilities to Riot Blade and Spirits Within. Using them will now give you a pretty good MP restore. Riot Blade will give 1000 MP, and Spirits Within a smaller 500. But we can't spend MP, you might think. Well, now we can. Level 58, Clemency. On the global cooldown, this is our first spell, and is a heal costing a whopping 4000 mana. But it's a pretty good heal with a potency of 1200, which is really big for a tank. Nowhere near as effective as a normal healer though. It does have the benefit of healing you for half the power if you use this to heal an ally instead. Here's the rub. This skill is almost always an insult to the healer. To many of us, using Clemency means you don't trust your healer at all. By now you've probably already seen plenty of healers playing yo-yo with your HP, very nearly getting you killed. But you didn't die, and you got your heals. Same for if you use this on an ally. Sometimes we know no raid-wide damage is coming, so we can leave everyone at low HP, or just intend to throw a regen. All of this was a roundabout way to saying, use this only in emergencies. If the healer is struggling a lot, but nobody is making mistakes and you do die, it might be an emergency for the rest of the dungeon. If you stand in an AoE and take a big hit that was supposed to not happen, and may put you close to death, that's an emergency. Your health dropping to 50% is normal, especially at this level where the dungeons can start hitting really hard. Your healers are also getting new abilities, so trust them that they can keep up. One other very important emergency of note is when the healer dies. At this level it's much harder, but late levels Clemency can let you solo a boss. Just don't try it if the boss isn't close to dead, because it'll be faster to wipe. That in mind, I've duoed a bunch of bosses with the Paladin tank keeping himself healed, and occasionally them healing me. Here's footage of me even pulling it off in one of the level 60 optional dungeons. One of the DPS and the healer died, and me and the other DPS proceed to kill the boss without them, thanks to Clemency. I even used Clemency a little bit too much for how much I needed to. When you learn when and where to use Clemency, it becomes a really, really strong spell. One final note, spells can be interrupted while casting when you take damage. It's rare enough, but it happens enough to bear mentioning. Level 60, Rage of Halone Mastery, and Royal Authority. This trait automatically upgrades Rage of Halone into Royal Authority. Royal Authority is a much higher 550 potency, making your base 1-2-3 worth using again. You still want to put up Goring Blade though, since that dot is still really, really strong. You should get 2 Royal Authorities between every Goring Blade. This segues nicely right into our level 60 opener. The length of the opener has not changed, ending after Fight or Flight ends. We just replace all of our Rage of Halones with our new GCDs. Let's go through it. Shield Lob as we run to the boss, Fast Blade, Circle of Scorn, Fight or Flight, Riot Blade, Spirits Within, Goring Blade, Fast Blade, Riot Blade, Royal Authority, Fast Blade, Riot Blade, Royal Authority, Fast Blade, Riot Blade, Circle of Scorn, Goring Blade. So as I said, save length to fit in one Fight or Flight length. Our first Rage of Halone has instead become Goring Blade, buffed by Fight or Flight. Also, as I said before as well, we will do 2 Royal Authorities between every Goring Blade. So then on our 4th and final combo, we do a second Fight or Flight buffed Goring Blade after our Circle of Scorn under Fight or Flight. The fact your rotation remains so similar all the way up to level 60 makes Paladin easy to learn. It does, however, have some major extensions coming up in Stormblood that vastly change how it plays. Level 62, Intervention. Covers arguably much better Cousin on a 10-second recast, meaning it basically has none, but at the cost of 50 Oath Gauge, your targeted party member takes 10% less damage for 6 seconds, but it can be further buffed. If Rampart or Sentinel are active, Intervention is buffed by half of their effects. So Rampart makes Intervention 20%, Sentinel makes it 25%, and together, it's 35%. In dungeons, this basically immediately replaces cover forever because of its effects. Cover still has its time in the sun, but Intervention will see much more tangible use. All the same reasons apply. With allies standing in random AoEs or someone has poor gear and you can help baby them to help them survive without putting yourself in mortal danger. At worst, you can use one of your cooldowns in a less than optimal place to save their life. Better than people dying. It's with a co-tank where things get interesting. On a singular boss, it's just more effective to do some form of tank swap or use cover. But now, bosses are going to start having multiple enemies, and adds can become more common occurrences. Let's pretend the boss is doing a tank buster, and you're handling an add. You can pop a Rampart to reduce the add's damage, but then Intervention to help on the tank buster. Or even more extreme, here's a clip of my static doing an ultimate fight. There's two bosses going on at once, and both of them hit very hard. Let's zoom in on the very pixely Dark Knight's HP while he has to take care of a mechanic off-screen. Oof. Intervention would have very much made this a lot less scary. This is an extreme example, obviously, but sometimes DPS and healers take hits this hard when they make mistakes in dungeons. Level 64, Divine Magic Mastery. Does what it says on the tin. Your spells, which was only Clemency at this point, are now half cost, 2,000 mana only. You also can't be interrupted while casting spells now. This is especially important because our rotation is now getting a major change. Level 64, Holy Spirit. Costing 2,000 mana, you do a 350 potency magical attack on your targeted enemy. You can now get 5 casts of Holy Spirit in a row thanks to the trait, which basically means if you're investing in Holy Spirit, you're going to spend all of your mana at once. This serves two purposes, but for right now, it only serves one, being a better shield lob. It has a much greater range and nearly 3 times the power. However, this doesn't at all replace shield lob in all cases. If you intend to stay put after pulling, like with a boss or a single pull, use Holy Spirit to pull. If you intend to do an exciting big pull and you'll be on the move, use Shield Lob instead. Big pulls should never involve starting and stopping constantly. As a side note, a Royal Authority combo is the same power as a single Holy Spirit when averaged out. So if for whatever reason you have to move out of range of a fight, you can use this to get in some free damage. But be warned, it will break your combo since it's a GCD. Don't get used to using it like this though. Level 66, Enhanced Prominence. All this does is make Prominence regen MP, 500 MP to be exact. If for whatever reason you're using Clemency a lot in trash pools, which as we discussed you really should not be doing that, you should trust a healer, then you can at least regenerate MP. This will be a lot more useful later. Level 68, Requiescat. Everything falls into place with this one. Requiescat is on a 60-second cooldown. It has a scaling potency like Spirits Within, but with MP. 150 potency at the minimum, to a max of 550 potency, which means it's always going to be 550 potency because of the additional effect. As long as your MP is at 8000 or higher, you will gain a 50% buff to all magic potencies for 12 seconds. So if things are going super terribly, Clemency is now a whopping 1800 potency. But when things are going well, it means Holy Spirit is now 525 potency. At that higher potency, we want to spend all of our MP on Holy Spirit. This introduces us to the Requiescat phase for our Paladin rotation. It's a normal part of the rotation, and is very much encouraged to Requiescat and follow it up with 5 Holy Spirits. Let's actually show this off with our opener. Holy Spirit, Fast Blade, Circle of Scorn, Fight or Flight, Riot Blade, Goring Blade, Fast Blade, Riot Blade, Spirits Within, Royal Authority, Fast Blade, Riot Blade, Royal Authority, Fast Blade, Riot Blade, Circle of Scorn, Goring Blade, Requiescat, Holy Spirit, Holy Spirit, Holy Spirit, Holy Spirit, Holy Spirit, Spirits Within. And then we start back up at the beginning basically, using off globals as they come off cooldown. As said before, Holy Spirit replaces Shield Lob because of it being so much stronger to start. Otherwise, we start our combo as normal, but quickly hitting another difference. We've moved Spirits Within back a bit to line it up with raid buffs, since it can be a bit of a hit or miss skill anyway. It's moved back into our first Royal Authority combo, and this will make much more sense at 80. Then we move back into the same flow as before until our second Goring Blade. After Goring Blade, we can pop Requiescat and move into our Holy Spirit spam. As we finish it, Spirits Within will come off cooldown, finishing us off. Afterwards, we move back into our GCD rotation. That's the other part of why we moved Spirits Within back, so that it comes off of cooldown as we finish our Holy Spirit spam. After said Spirits Within, we'll get a full melee phase in before Fight or Flight comes off of cooldown. So now it's a 2-to-1 ratio after the opener, or a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio if you count a melee phase without Fight or Flight as a different part of the ratio. I will also mention that there is an opener that prioritizes Requiescat. Here is the flow of it, but I will not be going deep into detail aside from saying it's your preference and based on each fight. If Requiescat is timed with a mechanic that works well with using Holy Spirit spam, the opener with that specific lineup is the better to use. Level 70, Passage of Arms. On a 120-second cooldown, you are guaranteed to block for up to 18 seconds of using this skill. You also create a giant barrier area behind you that anyone standing in will gain a 15% mitigation buff. You have to remain completely still though, as any movement of any kind will end the skill. This is both good and bad, but I'll get to that. By now, you've probably at least fought one boss of some kind with an ultimate move that they become untargetable for and does a huge amount of damage to the entire party. Well, put down your wings and have everyone stack behind you to save them some damage. Also, since you're blocking, you basically get to share in the shield. This kind of moment also pairs well with Divine Veil. Passage of Arms can be used on the move too though. Just pressing the button will apply the buff to your allies almost instantly, provided they were within the range of the wings. This means you don't have to hold the wings there the entire time, which is where moving to cancel is a good thing. With proper timing, you can keep attacking, but also protect your team with this, as shown. This is an advanced move to pull off, but when you learn how to do it, it's really strong, especially in harder content. Obviously, it's usable in the same way in dungeons, boss is using a stack marker attack, Passage of Arms. But it's usable in trash pools for yourself too. Depending on the enemies and how big you pulled, you'll get more or less use. I only really recommend it in big pools, or if the healer is really struggling, as 100% block rate is a lot of reduced damage for however long you can maintain it, but you have the trade-off of not being able to DPS, which also reduces damage by virtue of enemies being too dead to attack. That's why I only recommend it for extreme situations where survival is more in question than guaranteed. It'll take a lot more practice to use it in trash pools correctly than to use it in any boss situations, but it truly can be useful in every situation if you get really good with it. And that covers the entire Stormblood skill set. A very mixed bag, but all very useful. That trend continues into Shadowbringers. Level 72, Holy Circle. This is our AoE version of Holy Spirit. Costing 2000 mana all the same and is a global cooldown. I recommend that for AoE we do the Requiescat phase first from now on. Gather up all the enemies you intend to pull, use Requiescat, and spam Holy Circle till you're out of MP. Then you can move into a fight or flight phase with spamming your Prominence combo to regain MP for next Requiescat phase. That is, if the enemies don't die before then. Level 74, Enhanced Sheltron. Before moving on to the interesting stuff, Sheltron simply now lasts 6 seconds to match the 6 seconds of Intervention. Seems pointless, but really, that 2 seconds can be a lot of extra blocked damage and gives leeway for if you accidentally press it too early for a tank buster. Now you might not die to it falling off. Level 74, Intervene. This is a skill that has multiple charges. The recharge time is 30 seconds and it can hold a max of 2 charges. So in total, it's a 60-second cooldown to hit max charges. It otherwise works the same as a normal ability. As for the skill itself, it's a 200 potency Russian attack. You can use it from decently far away too, about as far away as Shield Lob. Please do not open fights with this. All the way back when we introduced Shield Lob, I talked about moving bosses towards the middle of the arena for mechanical positioning and to let melee party members have less of a run distance. And as we recall further, Holy Spirit replaced Shield Lob, which is a stronger attack than Intervene. I could go on, but that's enough reason not to open with it. Every other time you want a gap closed though, go for it. Sometimes Arm's Length is on too long of a cooldown. Plenty of bosses have pushback attacks that are too common to Arm's Length through them all. Or maybe it's one of the effects that purposefully goes through Arm's Length. Just use Intervene the moment you start getting pushed back. It's going to take some learning of when to save it though, since we want to use it for damage. We're going to go as far as to put it into our opener. Mostly, just use it under fight or flight, and it's all good. You'll learn when to save charges after doing fights long enough. Level 76, Sword Oath and Atonement. These two skills work in tandem. Sword Oath gives an extra effect to Royal Authority, where using Royal Authority gives 3 stacks of Sword Oath for 15 seconds. These stacks are spent for Atonement and Atonement only. Atonement itself is a 550 potency attack with a natural MP restoration, 400 MP per use for a total of 1200. Recall that we use 2 Royal Authorities between every Goring Blade during our fight or flight phase in our opener. Atonement entirely replaces one of these combos. Goring combo, Royal combo, Atonement spam, Goring combo. This is how we're going to do things for every single time we do a melee phase. Atonement is just so much stronger than our normal combo. Level 78, Enhanced Requiescat. Anytime you get the effects of Requiescat, all of your spells are now instant casts. This makes it that for the 5 GCDs you spend using your spells, you are basically a ranged or mage. You can run around wildly and still get uptime. You're still a tank, so don't do that, but if the need arises, you can, like with the pushbacks mentioned in Intervene. If you're in the middle of a Requiescat phase, you can just walk back in normally. You will, however, lose auto attacks, so you may want to use Intervene anyway. At worst, this makes using Holy Circle way easier in trash pools. Dodging the 5 or 6 AoEs enemies throw at you at the same time is no longer going to cancel your casts. Level 80 Confiteor. Talk about a finale. Same 2000 MP cost as your other spells, you do a massive 1200 potency hit to all enemies within 5 yalms of your initial target. It says 800, but because it is only usable under Requiescat, it becomes 1200. Requiescat is also removed when casting Confiteor, so this is your finisher for Requiescat phases. So rather than 5 Holy Spirits or Holy Circles, it will be 4, then Confiteor. If for whatever reason you need to use Clemency under Requiescat, use the 5th cast on Confiteor anyway. It's too strong of an attack unless you really will die without that 5th Clemency. And at that point, you probably would have died anyway. But let's fit these into our final opener. As before, it's basically almost entirely the same length and pace. Holy Spirit, Fast Blade, Circle of Scorn, Fight or Flight, Riot Blade, Goring Blade, Fast Blade, Riot Blade, Spirits Within, Intervene, Royal Authority, Intervene, Atonement, 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 Fast Blade, Riot Blade, Circle of Scorn, Goring Blade, Requiescat, Holy Spirit, Holy Spirit, Holy Spirit, Holy Spirit, Confiteor, Spirits Within. So everything remains the same as with the level 68 opener until Spirits Within. With Intervene needing to be spent, we start throwing it out around Spirits Within to combine them in where raid buffs were all lining up. This is all mixed in with our Royal Authority, giving us Sword Oath. It frees us to focus on our 3 atonement uses as we continue. Afterwards, it's the same as before. Goring combo into our Requiescat phase. As we discussed earlier, our final Holy Spirit has been changed to Confiteor for the massive damage boost it comes with. But then we end with Spirits Within off cooldown again. And then we move back into our melee phase. Goring, Royal, Atonement, Goring. We save our Intervenes afterwards for our next Fight or Flight phase. And once again, there is a Requiescat first opener. I won't be going through it, but all the same rules apply as with the other opener. Overall, Paladin DPS is about keeping your rotation going without pause and lining up Requiescat with disengagements. In the end, I hope this all laid the groundwork for you using your entire toolkit as best you can. Thank you for watching my Paladin 1 to 80 skills guide. Feel free to give feedback or ask questions on what might still be confusing to you. My goal is to help players improve in whatever ways I can. Take care, and have fun in your adventures across Eorzea. May the power of an Nidhogg's lay waste to your enemies.